Well, good afternoon again, everybody. Let me go ahead and call this roundtable discussion to order. I guess it's only half round and kind of square over there, but you get the point. My name is Alex Padilla, Senator for the 20th District here in California and Vice Chair of the California Broadband Council, the official convener of this afternoon's discussion. I just wanted to take a moment to make some opening statements, set a context for this afternoon's discussion before introducing our very special guest today. But as far as logistics go, Broadband Council members and representatives are up here at the dais. We're going to have the agendized presenters, use the PowerPoint if necessary, and I know there's several individuals interested in providing some public comment or input to the conversation. So at that point, we'll run this like a normal committee hearing. We'll invite folks to come forward and use the microphones at the tables in front of the dais, and we'll do our best to keep our conversation organized and focused and moving along here. But I think we all know why we're here. The title of today's convening is The Impact of Federal Universal Service Reform on Broadband Deployment and Availability in California. And I applaud the administration and the FCC specifically for their vision and some of the policies and goals and objectives that they've outlined in the National Broadband Plan, because here in California we've had very much that same vision, very much that same policy ambition to not just bring voice phone service, but indeed high-speed internet service and all the opportunities that come with it to every Californian. To every person in this great state. So today we welcome one of the most senior staff official from the Federal Communications Commission, who, by the way, is also a native Californian from Los Angeles specifically. But several years ago, most of you recall the Broadband Task Force that was convened by Governor Schwarzenegger and the task force report that they produced. And one of the key findings, one of the key bullet points in a lot of our speeches was the 96% saturation level. 96% of Californians had access to at least one form of high-speed internet access. As the years have gone on, we know that that 94% number has moved a little bit as we get more and more granular data to the deployment of our infrastructure, but the conversation has also evolved from just physical build-out and availability to adoption questions and concerns, so digital literacy questions and concerns. And it hasn't just been the state legislature in terms of legislating that's been a part of it, but it's been the PUC, it's been the carriers themselves, it's been organizations like the California Emerging Technologies Fund, it's been programs like the Telehealth Network and the Advanced Services Fund administered by the PUC. In addition to the private investment, the opportunities brought about by the Stimulus Act, all those R dollars that came to California, and more. But just less than 2 years ago, the FCC released the National Broadband Plan, which really was wide-reaching in its scope and inspiring in terms of its content. I happen to have had a chance to get a personal briefing along with Senators Strickland and Wright in Washington, D.C. just prior to the release of that report. And so we wanted to bring that home and say, what else does California need to do to keep that momentum going in our state? Last year, as many of you know, legislatively, the legislature acted, the governor signed legislation to extend the Advanced Services Fund, both A and B, to keep the state dollars that are then used to leverage federal dollars flowing for the next several years. Universal service is clearly one of the key elements in its reform, one of the key proposals in the National Broadband Plan. And in that legislation from last year, California stands ready and eager to conform as necessary to bring about not just the voice phone service to every Californian possible through our universal programs, but broadband service specifically, and as I said earlier, all the opportunities that come with that. So it, over the years, has not just been a public public-private partnership, but a public-public, state-federal, in some cases local, along with that private partnership to make this all possible. What I'd like to do now is introduce for the meat of our presentation and discussion today, Mr. Zachary Katz. Up until recently, the General Counsel for the FCC. Those of you in the loop and paying close attention know he's also been recently appointed as Chief of Staff to Chairman Janikowski. So clearly one of the true quarterbacks, not just of the National Broadband Plan, but of the FCC and all its goals and objectives. Native Angelino, please welcome Zachary Katz for our first presentation. Actually, before he starts, I'd be remiss if I'd introduce the others at the dais. To my right, in her power red suit, as we all know, Sunne McPeak from the Emerging Technologies Fund. We also have, on behalf of Assistant Secretary Mike Dayton, Sue Plant, and Helen Lopez here at the dais. And Jackie Kinney from the Senate Policy Committee here on my left. Zach, take it away.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thanks to everyone who is going to be participating today. It feels like homecoming, and I'm very excited to have the chance to talk, but more importantly to listen and hear about the things that are going on in California and hear whatever questions folks might have, both about the Universal Service Fund, but also about other parts of the FCC's agenda. So many of which touch on state issues. I thought I'd go through a few topics today. The first is where the FCC has been focused for the last 2 or 3 years since Chairman Janikowski came in and his fellow commissioners who have been working with him on reorienting the agency. I wanted to dig into the recent Universal Service and Intercarrier Comp order that we adopted and that we're now very busy implementing, including in cooperation with the states. I wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship between the FCC and California and states in general, and then touch on some of the current policy issues that we're focused on, including the reform and modernization of the Lifeline program, which is another extremely important part of our Universal Service programs, and one that we're teeing up to overhaul at the end of this month at a commission meeting on January 31st. So when the chairman and the other commissioners, Commissioner McDowell and Commissioner Clyburn, who are on the commission with him, were confirmed in the summer of 2009, they inherited an agency that had a bit of a mission accomplished philosophy. There were reports that by statute the Commission had to put out each year on the state of broadband in the United States. And for years those reports had defined broadband as a service providing 200 kilobits per second, either up or down. I don't think it even had to be both. And had declared for a number of years that broadband was being sufficiently deployed and was available to all Americans. We didn't at that time have kind of a national comprehensive strategy around broadband, and we hadn't taken a look as an agency at the programs that we administer, both the Universal Service Fund, but other programs like the Video Relay Service, in many years, in some cases really 15 years or so since their founding in the wake of the '96 Act. So the Commission took a different approach, and from day one the focus really was on broadband. That was in part supported by Congress and the mandate to create a national broadband plan. And a lot of the first year at the Commission was spent developing that plan. The goal of the plan, and kind of the highest level, I think, goal for the chairman and the commissioners, is to do everything we can to sustain and expand a world-leading broadband ecosystem. So that's infrastructure to applications. And as part of that, to ensure that the United States has a strategic bandwidth advantage, crucial for our global competitiveness, for job creation, and economic growth. A few more specific goals that kind of undergirded the broadband plan. So ubiquitous broadband, both fixed and mobile, unleashing spectrum, ensuring we had broadband innovation zones, areas of very high capacity broadband or innovative new infrastructure like white spaces, universal adoption, and consumer empowerment, and then maximizing the use of broadband to tackle national challenges, healthcare, public safety, energy, education. Those were kind of the core objectives that the plan set forth. To execute on those, we look to use all the levers at our disposal, and I think of them in 4 categories. The first, and the one we'll talk about today, is reforming and modernizing outdated programs. And we had a generous serving of outdated programs that we came into, and we've been working hard through public processes to overhaul those. The second is ensuring that we're using government assets as smartly as we can, and that's both things like spectrum, but also federal property, federal buildings, dig once issues there. A third very important category is helping the market work, promoting competition, empowering consumers with the information they need to make smart choices in the market, and reducing barriers to broadband build-out. And I think some of the things we've done, including a pole attachments order last year, work we did with the wireless industry to come to an arrangement on notifications for bill shock, our open internet framework that was adopted last year. Those, I think, fall into this third bucket. And the last thing that we focus on is driving public-private initiatives. We recognize that the role for government in ensuring that the United States does everything it can to leverage the power of broadband, that role is limited, but it's essential. And there's a lot that can be done, we feel, to work with the private sector, to harness the energy, entrepreneurialism there, to put programs in place that can help tackle these problems. And a couple of those that we've done within the last 6 months include Connect to Compete, which is a nationwide broadband adoption program that the cable industry has stepped up to participate in. It provides $10 a month broadband and low-cost computers to families who have kids on the National School Lunch Program. Jobs for America is a call center insourcing effort that will lead to 100,000 jobs in the United States. So moving on to the specifics here, universal service and inter-carrier comp reform. We began this project really at the time the National Broadband Plan was put out, and we started with a sense of a few key goals. Reorienting the program to support broadband, recognizing there's about 18 million Americans today who can't get basic broadband. Also that there's very significant gaps in the coverage for mobile broadband, which is increasingly as important as fixed connectivity. We wanted to make sure that we did no harm, that the transformation of this program maintained voice and broadband service in high-cost areas and didn't result in pulling back networks where they'd already been built out. We were also focused on transitioning the inter-carrier compensation system, which we recognized was creating perverse incentives, causing billions of dollars of hidden subsidies to appear on phone bills throughout the country, and not oriented toward an internet protocol, IP-based world. And the last thing we were focused on was controlling the contribution burden on consumers and businesses. That's a contribution burden that's been increasing over the last several years, and it's one that we recognize kind of works against the purpose of universal service. The more expensive communication services are, the fewer people will adopt, and so we need to make sure that we're appropriately balancing all those good goals in the first couple bullets with that last one. And a big part of that was eliminating some of the waste, some of those perverse incentives, and to the extent possible using incentive-based, market-driven policies to distribute support. So the structure that the Commission unanimously adopted in its October order is of an integrated program to support networks in rural America capable of supporting voice and broadband service. We called it the Connect America Fund. We set a budget of $4.5 billion, which is the amount that the program is currently spending. And we looked at 4 key components. One is this fixed location component, which is probably the largest area for the fund, and that's got a few phases that we'll talk through to ensure that we're building out kind of robust fixed infrastructure, which could be wired or could be wireless, to residences, to small businesses, to anchor institutions. The second core component, a mobility fund to extend 3G and then 4G broadband to areas that don't have it now and that aren't going to get it anytime soon based on current market trends. A third key component on the left there is the Remote Areas Fund, and that's a recognition that there's some parts of the country that are so expensive that we may not be able to use the traditional model of deploying infrastructure and might need to use satellites, WISPs, other more innovative contemporary technologies to try to serve those areas at a lower cost. And then the final piece of the fund is a inter-carrier comp recovery mechanism, so that as these inter-carrier revenues phase down, carriers aren't left with an inability to continue investing and aren't disrupted by the transition. I should note, and it says at the bottom, a number of things you'll see here really came out of the work of the Federal State Board on Universal Service, the work of NARUC, and a number of state commissions, including California's. So the first part of this Connect America Fund is a set of requirements and responsibilities on carriers to support broadband for the first time. And to do that with speed, latency, and usage characteristics that will scale over time. In doing that, we maintain, and we're very careful to maintain, the authority of states on carrier of last resort obligations, on designating carriers who can receive support, known as eligible telecommunication carriers. And I'll talk more about this a little later, but the hope is to evolve the federal-state partnership and not to replace it in any way with a purely federal system. As part of these obligations, we've got specific enforceable reporting requirements and penalties for failure to report. That's a national framework, but it involves reporting to state commissions, and our hope is that states will use that information to help monitor and ensure that carriers are living up to their obligations. The fund, at least for the first few years, begins with kind of a bifurcated approach, looking at areas that have been traditionally under price cap regulation, starting in phase one with a very near-term infusion of $300 million to spur immediate build-out of networks in areas where networks haven't yet been built out. And we're in the process now of finalizing the numbers and the model that will kick those offers out. Carriers will be able to accept or decline in whole or in part within the coming months. On a longer-term basis, we're envisioning a system that ultimately gets us to competitive bidding, but that starts with a recognition of the unique circumstances that currently obtain in price cap areas. Those carrier of last resort obligations, the fact that price cap carriers have built out infrastructure in areas where other companies may not. And so in the near term, there'll be a cost model that we're in the process of developing, we're seeking input on now, that will determine how much support is offered. If that support is declined, then we'll move to a competitive bidding system, and that'll be for a 5-year commitment. A big part of all of this, I should say, is the idea of targeting support in areas where you truly need it, that is, where there's not an unsubsidized competitor, whether a cable company or another provider that can offer service. Rate of return carriers, we've got a set of reforms to support continued investment while reforming some of the problems with this rate of return system that have led in some cases to misaligned incentives and to inadequate build-out in some areas and more investment in others. So a big part, as I mentioned, not subsidizing competition. We're going to be phasing out support in study areas that overlap with an unsubsidized competitor. We're going to simplify funding mechanisms, local switching support, safety net additive for anyone familiar with the jargon. And we're going to provide reasonable guidelines for reimbursable expenses so that carriers don't have uncontrolled discretion when they're using the public funding spigot, but have guidelines that will reasonably guide investment, including reimbursement for corporate operations. We'll also make sure that the fund isn't going to be unfairly burdened by artificially low end-user rates. And we're seeking comment on a series of things related to broadband investment, as well as the actual rate of return, currently at 11.25%. I mentioned the commitment to mobility. For the first time ever, the FCC has created a mobility-focused component of the program. The first recognition I think we've ever had, at least at the federal level, that mobility is an independent, an important goal for universal service. That just having fixed service, just having residential service is not enough in the 21st century for public safety, for economic reasons, for education and other purposes. One of the exciting things about the Mobility Fund, the mechanism will use reverse auctions for the first time later this year, kind of testing out this mechanism to distribute funding in the most efficient way, and doing that in a way that kind of looks nationwide and has carriers in different parts of the country actually compete against each other to cover the most people at the lowest cost to the fund, and we'll see how that goes. It also includes a dedicated mechanism for tribal areas, recognizing that tribal areas present challenges that are unique and may not be addressable in the same way that the Mobility Fund will address non-tribal areas. The Commission budgeted $500 million a year for this. Important to note that this isn't the sum total of the money available for wireless investment. We anticipate that in the kind of fixed location part of the program, we may see wireless carriers who can offer 4G LTE offerings with capacity and speed sufficient to compete with wireline providers, and that would be complementary to this. The Remote Areas Fund, I mentioned, I won't spend much time on it. Inter-carrier comp. For those who aren't as familiar with this truly Byzantine system, it's essentially a multi-billion-dollar system of regulated payments between carriers for the exchange of voice traffic. It's developed over decades, originally out of the implicit subsidies within AT&T, now made explicit, but often kind of untethered to economic realities and poorly adapted as we move from a traditional telephone world to an IP and broadband world. And so this, we felt, was a problem that needed to be addressed and really was well paired with universal service reform. Disputes, arbitrage, problems like traffic pumping, where carriers would be generating very high volumes of minutes simply to collect inter-carrier comp, burdening ratepayers around the country who are seeing this not as line items on their bill, but as implicit subsidies that ultimately inflate their bill for phone service. It's also a system that was eroding and was fundamentally unstable, and so we heard from a lot of carriers who were very concerned that the bottom could fall out of the system and they'd be left without the cash flow to continue investing and operating their networks because of the unpredictability of the transition away from traditional phone service. The final point, I guess, is the disincentives to shift to modern network architectures that system, that legacy system, created. So we tried in this reform effort to transition the inter-carrier comp system toward a bill and keep approach, which essentially means that carriers will bill their consumers for the cost of service and keep those revenues, but won't have regulated payments for the exchange of traffic. Recognizing that this needs to be done over a several-year period, not in a flash cut, we put kind of a glide path in place, and that was accompanied by a recovery mechanism both from consumers and from the Connect America Fund. And finally, and I think quite importantly, we articulated an expectation that as carriers move from a traditional telephone world to an IP world, the good faith negotiation obligation continues. And so carriers need to be engaged with each other in good faith, negotiating interconnection agreements to ensure that IP networks can continue to grow robustly. We've got a busy year ahead. What we did in October was an important step, but it was just a step. I mentioned the further notice on which we're seeking comment. We've also got a series of public notices. They're going to be coming out. We've got reporting requirements that we'll be articulating, benchmarks, the auction later this year, and the cost model that we're developing. In all of these, we're hoping for robust input from the states, from private sector stakeholders, from public interest groups, consumer advocates. We recognize folks spent a lot of time last year working with us. We hope they're not tired of us. We're certainly eager to continue hearing the great ideas that folks are coming up with, and we'll be incorporating those in our work. So I'll end after just a couple more things, I wanted to touch on the FCC in the States briefly. We think of the states in at least three ways as leaders on the policy initiatives that we grapple with every day. And California obviously has been one of, if not the leading state on broadband issues, with a host of initiatives that we track, that we're aware of, that people point us to often as examples of kind of best government practices in the universal service context, in the broadband context more generally. The California Advanced Services Fund in particular, years before we got around to reforming our universal service programs to support broadband directly, the state of California was doing it, so we're very excited about that. We're aware of and talk internally about projects like what the San Diego and Riverside school districts are doing through our E-rate program, using wireless devices, supported connectivity through the E-rate program to help extend the classroom out into the community. Free Wi-Fi and public housing projects in San Francisco, these are things that we're tracking. Another way that we think of the states is as laboratories for innovative policy ideas. In the poll attachments order that we adopted last year, a number of the specific changes we made to our rules really were developed, hatched, and grown in the states. And it was having that test bed, those laboratories, that enabled us to do something nationwide that we feel would serve the public interest. We're in the middle now, I mentioned, of lifeline reform, another area where the states have done a lot of innovative things that I think you'll see in the order that will hopefully come out on the 31st to reform that program. And then working with states as partners in the Connect America Fund on rural call completion issues, which is a set of issues that's getting a lot of attention at the Commission now, as we're seeing phone calls dropped or problems with call quality in rural areas. Lifeline, I mentioned, the Rural Health Care Program, and our Broadband Acceleration Initiative, which is an effort to ensure that we've got best practices around the country for key inputs, including poles, rights-of-way, tower siting, and the like. So I'll just end with just a quick summary of some of the key policy issues that we're now grappling with, but I'm happy to talk about others as well. I mentioned lifeline reform. We're in the process now of engaging with stakeholders, and the commissioners are discussing a draft that came to them on Tuesday of this week. The idea here is to comprehensively reform the program to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse that's accrued as the program has moved increasingly to wireless, but the protections really haven't been in place to accompany that move. And then to set the stage for a broadband focus, and so the modernization part of the order, including setting for the first time ever as an explicit goal of the program, making broadband available, or ensuring the availability of broadband to all Americans, and then a broadband adoption pilot program that we're very excited about. I can't speak publicly without talking about voluntary incentive auctions, which is a legislative proposal that we developed in the National Broadband Plan, and that we're hoping Congress will enact within the next 6 weeks as it works on the payroll tax issue. This is an idea to free up a very substantial amount of broadband spectrum for mobile broadband in a voluntary, market-driven way. Other initiatives we're working on include our media ownership review that we do every 4 years, work on the video relay service program, work on interoperability of devices, and work on a series of competition policy initiatives over the course of the year. I'll stop there, but very much looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Very thorough, very thoughtful, as we expected. The next speaker, presenter, is going to be Roxanne Scott to talk about the impact of the order on regulation and programs and CPUC activity. But I want to maybe create an opportunity for some questions or comments before we jump into that. I think after Roxanne, we'll certainly want to hear from industry and other stakeholders on, I guess, their view of the order, its impact on the state. I want to hear from Sunne as well in terms of how it helps the cause of deploying more broadly and closing the digital divide gap. But I guess the first question that I'd like to ask you, Zach, is, you in one of your slides you talk about the state and federal partnership, not just in implementation but in oversight. And I'll take it even further, just to ensure compliance on carriers to achieve all these objectives. Has that been discussed in any further detail at the Commission? And what specific strategies can we put in place to do that?
Great. So yes, we've talked a lot internally, and then with a number of the state commissions, both at NARUC and in other contexts, about our hope that state commissions ramp up their oversight of eligible telecommunications carriers. And so as these carriers now take on obligations to support broadband, there's a host of things that state commissions may be taking a look at. Is broadband being provided in a timely fashion? Is the speed and latency and usage requirements that the Commission is setting, are those being met? And I think as the folks who are closest to the constituents, closest to the companies, the state commissions can play a role that I'm not sure we'll be able to play nearly as effectively, to identify problems. Those can be one-off problems with particular companies, or more systemic problems with the system, to determine if further changes are necessary in the program. Our doors are open, certainly in the Wireline and Wireless Bureau and the Chairman's office, to hear from folks. And our hope is that in ensuring that there's more data out there, we're going to facilitate the ability of states to do more in this area.
And it may be too early to draw any final conclusions, but up to now, have you observed sufficient participation or input from California stakeholders in this order process? You gave us the calendar over the next several months of decision making, but
yeah, I think to date, certainly over the last couple of years, we have heard from a lot of folks in California, kind of across the spectrum in the broadband ecosystem. But we always want to hear more, and I think there's a temptation, and I know because I feel this, to say, this is over and done with. We got this order adopted, the program's been reformed. Now let's focus on other things. This is only going to work if we implement this thing successfully, and so in some ways, the input that we're hoping to get from California stakeholders and others over the coming months is the most important in the whole process, because we now have a framework. But that framework is going to succeed or fail based on the data and the facts that come into the record in these proceedings.
Great. Well, by you being here, I think you saved several dozen of us a 3,000-mile flight to provide that input. I see Sunne's auntie to chime in here.
I'm sure I am totally enthusiastic that we don't have to travel 3,000 miles. I'll defer to the PUC and then make comments following.
Okay. Any other comments or questions right now before we proceed to the next section? Okay, well, let me turn it over to Roxanne to continue, and then again, after this presentation, we'll be inviting first the providers and then other stakeholders who want to come forward and comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Roxanne Scott. I'm supervisor in the Policy Analysis Unit of the Communications Division. My comments today are really based on staff analysis and review of the order, and any opinions I provide today are just my own. I'm not the Commission's. Our discussion today, I think, is focusing mainly on the universal service and broadband rollout piece of this large order, but I think congratulations are also due to the FCC for tackling the long-time need for inter-carrier compensation reform, which will also impact the state substantially. I think it's really hard to know at this point the results, what this order will be on broadband deployment. There are issues that are outstanding. There are petitions for reconsideration. There are appeals that have been filed, and more can be filed by the end of this month. Some of those appeals may deal with big questions. For instance, does the FCC have the authority to require or provide federal universal service funding for broadband under the Communications Act? And if a court disagrees that they have that authority, then that would completely sort of gut their broadband part of this order. And on access charges, there's some fundamental issues about state federal jurisdiction over intrastate rates, which again may be appealed, and questions on the bill and keep methodology that the FCC has adopted and the end game on that. And like I said, even if it's not overturned on appeal or changed substantially by the courts, there are still issues that are outstanding that the FCC has to weigh in on, we all have to weigh in on. So it'll be a while before we really know the results of this order, and assuming it stands as it does today, that's what I'm going to base my comments on. And even then, if it does stand, I think there's questions there about, well, will, for instance, the price cap carriers want to take the high cost support with the obligations that the FCC has put on such support? So it's questionable what will happen with this order, but we all want to promote broadband, and so we hope that that will be successful. The FCC has made clear in the order that the states are expected to act as partners with the FCC in carrying out this order, especially in the area of enforcement and oversight, and also on the issue of support. They would like to see the states provide support for broadband deployment. Fortunately, California, as Zach mentioned, is ahead of the game on that with there are various funding. State implementation issues. What new duties and expectations does the FCC order place on the CPUC relating to various issues that Jackie has asked me to weigh in on? Designating carriers eligible for support under 214 of the Communications Act. States are the first designees if they so wish, and we are a state that does designate carriers who are eligible to receive federal support. FCC has not changed that framework. We will still make that designation for carriers wishing to receive high-cost support under this new fund. However, there are new obligations and reporting requirements that will be in place, so this could increase the workload of our staff who does designate these carriers. They must also be designated as ETCs to participate in the mobility fund auctions. And we will continue to provide those designations as well. Establishing and monitoring carrier of last resort obligations, what is the impact on that? Again, the FCC did not seek to modify the existing authorities of states to establish carrier of last resort obligations. And we are encouraged, however, to review our obligations in light of the federal changes. And I'm sure that the PUC will be looking at that issue going forward. What are the other issues that we have to work on? Monitoring carrier compliance with the new broadband build-out requirements and obligations to use universal service funds only as intended. The federal reporting requirements have been expanded for carriers who receive funding under high-cost support from the federal government. And these requirements will be a floor, not a ceiling, and will apply to all the states. On April 1 of each year, DTCs will be required to file reports with the FCC, with the state commissions, and other relevant agencies establishing compliance with the statutory and regulatory requirements. And we are expected to review and monitor and ensure that the carriers are complying with these requirements. We have a filing requirement now for annual reports for carriers in California who are certified by the state. So we'll be looking to see if we need to sync up some of that reporting requirement. And we're also expected to evaluate the data to ensure that the carriers are building out as required. And again, this will possibly increase the workload of the staff at the CPUC. is still to be determined what the state role will be in determining what areas are unserved for purposes of the funding. I think we have a map that shows the unserved areas. Is that the second map? Unserved but populated areas in California. Not.
This just goes by.
Oh, okay. I thought Mike was putting it away. Sorry about that. That's just availability? Okay. All right, I thought we had our unserved map there, but we're trying to determine where we do have the unserved areas that have population that may fall under the funding that the FCC is going to provide. It's also yet to be determined what the state role will be in trying to determine whether an area is served by an unsubsidized facilities-based competitor, and hence the carrier in that area would lose their high-cost support if that was the case. The question is whether the FCC makes the decision and we comment on it, or whether the state makes an analysis first and sends it to the FCC. We will have to review the carrier's financial responsibilities under bill and keep. And we will also be looking at other issues for the access charge. Anyway, there are quite a few provisions in here that will increase the duties of the CPUC. One area, however, where they have changed so that it's no longer going to us is effective immediately with this act, which was December 29th. State commissions are relieved of their obligation to annually certify to the FCC whether residential rates in rural areas served by non-rural carriers are reasonably comparable to rates in urban areas. Now these carriers will be filing their rates directly with the FCC. Again, on the access charge changes, which I know is not the focus of this particular proceeding, the FCC has made changes that will require filing of new tariffs by carriers. We're already getting some of those tariffs for PSTN to VoIP interconnection. Going forward, they will be making changes that will permit and require some entities to change their interconnection agreements, which will increase our arbitration responsibilities and oversight on those agreements. And that was the main point on the access charge. I don't want to go into too much on that and take up time. But, again, I think Jackie asked me to address how the state programs, the federal reforms will impact our state programs. So, for instance, how does the federal obligation to provide voice telephony as a standalone service, as defined by the FCC, align with our obligations under our high-cost funds here in the state, the A and B funds, that they're required to provide basic service? Well, first of all, California already requires local exchange carriers to provide standalone basic voice service. And basic service has been defined by the FCC, and this definition, as most of you know, is currently under review in an OIR. There's actually a pending decision, and we have informed the ALJ handling this decision of the change in the voice services supported by the FCC and their redefinition, and ensure that the ALJ is reviewing that in light of our OIR proceeding. And as you know, any carrier receiving state high-cost support here is required to comply with carrier of last resort obligations, and that includes basic service. So again, we are going to need to look at the new obligations and see how they comply or fit, or do they conflict with our carrier of last resort obligations, and whether we need to make any changes in that area going forward. As far as the current A fund proceeding, there is an open OIR on the A fund proceeding also that has just begun, and the FCC changes will be taken into account and discussed and considered as part of that proceeding. I cannot comment in detail as to what will be done, but we know that if nothing were to change right now, the A fund is required to pick up most of the lost universal service federal revenue for the rate of return carriers who receive the A fund support. For the first year, the estimate from the rate of return carriers in the A fund is that it would be about $3 million more that would have to be funded by our state program. As far as our CASF program, which is also the subject of a current OIR proceeding to make changes to that fund, again, they'll have to take into consideration what the FCC is doing and see if if there's any conflict. Do we need to make any changes to that fund to help implement the FCC program? But in general, I would think that the FCC program is going to be a complement to our CASF program. It will provide funding that we can also add to for the carrier wanting to serve an unserved area. However, one of the questions Jackie asked was, how does this requirement that the carrier not use federal support for broadband deployment in a pre-existing capital improvement plan? This is one of the FCC mandates. How does this impact a carrier's eligibility for funding from the CASF, the California Advanced Services Fund, I should have said. And my understanding from reading the order is that if a CASF grant has been made to a carrier to deploy broadband in an area, and that's already been awarded to an ETC here in California, or to a telephone corporation, that that ETC could not seek high-cost support from the new federal CAF fund for that area. We also have a basic service proceeding underway. I think I mentioned that, and so we made them aware. Again, it's pretty far along, and I'm not sure how any changes will be made there or what, if any changes will be made, but they are looking at the new language. Jackie also asked me, how does the FCC expectation that carriers receiving support offer broadband at greater speeds to community anchor institutions? How does this fit with our programs here? And especially with the consortia program as part of the CASF. The PUC has urged the FCC to ensure that community anchor institutions have access to broadband. We feel that's very important, and we will be looking at that part and that issue as part of the CASF OIR proceeding. But this should support the consortia, which really their objective is to determine areas that need service, projects in the area of the consortia. So I don't see that being in conflict. Again, I think this broadband deployment fund from the FCC is a complement to our deployment funding. Some other overall issues that we will be reviewing, of course, is the impact on consumer rates of all these changes. If the carriers are losing money, what's going to happen? How are they going to recover that? What is the bottom line on the impact to the residential rates in particular? The FCC has set up some steps to try to keep the rates below $30 for those receiving high-cost support. We'll just have to see how that all shakes out, especially if the carrier loses their high-cost support. What does that mean? And another issue that we want to continue to look at is the fact that we, as California, are a net payer into the Federal Universal Service Fund, meaning that California pays more into the fund than we receive in reimbursements from the fund. We're also a high-cost state in terms of cost of living and the cost of doing business. And we need to be aware whether the FCC support levels, whether they're based on a model that does not take into account for variations between high-cost and low-cost states. We want to ensure that our state does not get shortchanged. And so we're looking to see how we can effectively manage the burden on the ratepayers from their dual obligations and on the state in terms of our disbursements to the feds. And that's all.
Thank you. Clearly,